Welcome to today's webinar, Orientation to Customer Discovery. Ellen, the webinar is being recorded. Ellen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tim. This is Ellen Hawes from the American Association of Community Colleges. I'd just like to welcome everyone back for our second webinar in preparation for the upcoming Community College Innovation Challenge Bootcamp. So today we'll be having an orientation on customer discovery. This webinar is hosted by ATE Central in partnership with NSF and AACC. And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, who will also be one of the staff leading the training at the Community College Innovation Challenge Boot Camp in June. Dr. Grant Warner, who's the Director of Innovation, at Graduate School Center for Advanced Manufacturing, and works with NSF I-Corps. And you'll learn a little bit about some of what goes on in that program and how it translates to the training we'll be providing you through the boot camp. So with that, I will turn it over to Grant to take it away.
All right, thank you, Ellen. All right, so let me be among the first to welcome you to DC. So that's a lovely view of DC, and you might not get to see that because you won't be on a luxury trip. But we're asking you to do some work, and part of that work is a pitch that we're going to ask you to deliver both to us and to people on the Hill. And it won't be like your traditional pitch, right? So when people think of a typical pitch, they talk about market needs, what the world desperately needs. And they talk about that for an extended period of time. They talk about kind of if we could get a certain percentage of the market, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal of that pitch is to appeal to investors, right? And in some part to appeal to the investors' greed, right? So again, if we look at what we're asking you to do, it's going to be slightly different. So it's not going to be like that thing on the right. Where you're trying to persuade the investor that you have an excellent business and you want to appeal to their greed, so they put money in. What we're asking you to do is something different. We're asking you to appeal to a customer, right? Do a customer-based pitch. And the idea there is that you convince a customer that you understand the problems that they're confronting. And oftentimes we think about those problems in terms of pains and gains. And the pitch, the goal of the pitch is to show how your product might be able to solve their problem. All right, and that's a big difference. So I want to reiterate that. So when we think about what we're asking you to do, the pitch we're asking you to deliver is for you to show how your product might actually solve the problem for a real person. Right? Not an investor-oriented pitch. And part of the tools that you'll get when we get to the boot camp is using that information to build this message triangle where you're able to identify who the customer is, get to the top of the apex and say, well, I understand what the problems are that the customer has. Get to the left part of the triangle and say, well, I also understand the benefits they need, given the problems that I've identified. And on the right side, say, well, I understand how my solution can then provide that benefit. So again, we'll talk about this message triangle a little more in depth when we get to the actual boot camp, but that's the framing for even what I'm going to discuss today. Right? How do we begin to get those key elements that we can assemble our message triangle to drive the points that we want to make? So, kind of with that said, I have a quick question I would like to ask the audience. So what is the most common way that new startups fail? And we're pulling up a poll so that you can actively participate in this section. So what's the most common way you think new startups fail? Okay, we see some results coming in. Okay, so I think we have a good number of responses here. We could probably end the poll there. All right, so when we look at the results, so most of you have arrived at the point, well, the most common way a new startup fails is by building a product that nobody cares about. Right, and that happens to be true. So there's a survey that several people have done of kind of startups and postmortems, what went wrong. The number one reason that you find is that they end up building something nobody cares about. So that's a big takeaway. So, the thing I want to emphasize with that is that we're not just asking you to go through and do some academic exercise. By framing your innovations in the context of the customer, it helps you avoid common pitfalls that even, kind of well-known companies end up falling into. Right? And that prompts my second question, right? So do companies actually build products that nobody cares about? And, as you think about that, think through your own experience of companies that you might know. I happen to have a particular one that I use often as a reference because, of course, they do, right? So, I mean, you've come across things that were built with very ambitious scale and didn't actually meet that scale. So one of those is the Segway, right? So we're all familiar, well, or most of us at least are familiar with Segway. I remember during the time when it was first launching, I was mentoring some high school kids, and they had the opportunity to go to Dean Kamen, who's the inventor of Segway, to his house, and they came back very excited. Oh, this thing is going to transform the way people move around cities and around the country. That's kind of what the message they had brought back from his house. And they weren't the only ones excited about it. Investors also were excited, and Segway was able to raise over $100 million. The Segway themselves were so excited about the prospect of their invention that they anticipated they would be able to sell 10,000 Segways per week. And to do that, they needed to hire logistics people to help them meet that volume and scale. So they went and they spent their money on tech development, on logistics, etc. At the end of 2 years, they had only sold 6,000 Segways. Not 6,000 per week, 6,000 total Segways in 2 years. So think about that. So they thought they had this world-beating product that everyone would want. And they had not taken the time to figure out whose particular problem they were solving. So instead of selling hundreds of thousands of Segways, they sold 6,000 total in 2 years. And it really speaks to the idea that you can't just think about the technology. You have to think about the use of the technology. So Segway did kind of most of the things on this chart wrong, right? So they didn't check to see who really needed it. Right, so they built something nobody cared about. Because they didn't understand the need and therefore the demand, they hired poorly. They focused their money on logistics. They had a lack of focus. They literally thought everybody would want one of these. And after they had the factory up and to scale, they went around to different organizations to try to sell it, something that perhaps they should have explored beforehand. And because they had no clear identification of a market, they couldn't execute sales and marketing strategy. And so if you add those four things up, those account for 79% of all failures, right? So we don't want you to be a Segway, right? So we don't want to focus on just the splash and on the technology. We want to focus on the people, on understanding the customer. And one of the things I like to say is that Segway believed in invention more than innovation. And when we think about invention, it's the development of that idea, the original idea. When we think about innovation, it's about adapting that idea to actual people, really trying to understand their needs. And when you're able to deliver a pitch in that frame, you deliver something that's memorable. that people walk away with and have a deep understanding of what it is you did and it sticks with them. So inventors understand the technology. Innovators, on the other hand, understand the people. And what we want you to do is understand the people. So how do people identify today? So how do you identify today? Are you an inventor or an innovator or some other? And again, we're going to ask you to participate here. All right. So we've got a strong room full of innovators here. All right, fantastic. That is fantastic. So before we move on to the next part, if you have questions about things that I've mentioned in the beginning, please use the chat box to provide your questions, and we'll try to answer them quickly before we move on to the next section.
And Grant, this is Ellen. We did have a question come in through chat asking for formal reference citations for the message triangle and other models that are being used. Is that something available? What is the source for the message triangle and some of the models?
So when you guys get to the boot camp, Joe and I will have a number of handouts related to the message triangle, the business model canvas, etc., that we'll discuss in deeper detail. And I think so. I'm not sure, Ellen, are some of these going out as handouts in advance of the boot camp?
Some of it can, yes. We can send that out with the agenda.
All right. So we'll attach some of that stuff to the agenda so you can become more familiar with these things and what we're expecting of you.
And Grant, before we move on, just a couple of clarifications. So obviously these are student teams, and a lot of them are identifying as innovators versus inventors. But why is it so important to start to think about this customer idea, and what might a customer be if I have a platform that's aimed at providing services as opposed to perhaps selling a product?
Yeah, so I think the fundamental thing is, regardless of whether you want to sell it yourself, so you want to be an entrepreneur or you want to go into industry, you have to have a fundamental understanding of what the problems are that you're trying to address. And oftentimes when we think about technology first, we divorce ourselves from those problems. And so the goal is to try to reorient you, regardless of how you see your career trajectory, into really thinking deeply about the problem. So that's kind of what the goal is. And I was happy to see so many people identify themselves as innovators.
Yes, thank you. I think we can move on, and I would just echo Grant. As you have questions, again, please feel free to use the chat window. I know we're throwing some potentially new concepts at you, thinking about innovation and thinking about developing a pitch and identifying customers, and hopefully some more questions will surface as Grant continues. Grant,
all right,
back
fantastic.
to you.
All right. So, so again, it's fantastic, as we're saying, that so many of you identified yourselves as innovators because you're going to be attending the Community College Innovation Challenge, and we're going to place the emphasis on innovation. And so, in keeping with that idea, right, so you all have identified yourselves as innovator. You've done very well on the first couple of polls. So thinking about what you know about businesses and launching new ideas, do you think the business plan is the first step in launching a business? All right, so again, good response rate. All right, so most people land on the true side of this. All right, so that was a little bit of a trick question. So the first question that we want you to think about, whether you're launching a business or you're thinking about a new invention, is to think about the people. So when we think about the big question for innovation, it's about what value are you delivering and for whom. So the first step is actually not in trying to develop the business plan, but rather in trying to answer those questions. And we do that in the context of trying to understand the customer, right? So the customer segment, so who are the people, what are the jobs they're trying to do, and also the value or the value propositions, right? So what are those important things that are required to solve the problems for your customer? And when you have those things right, you have product market fit. Right, so again, you have product market fit. That means if you're an entrepreneur, you're ready to go and sell. If you're someone who is developing an invention, well, now you have the context to begin to talk about this in a way that resonates with people. Right, again, bringing it back to the task that you're going to be doing when you arrive in Washington. What we want you to be able to do is to connect to people. Right, tell them a story that resonates, and the way to do it is to put it in the context of who you think the customer is, the user is, etc. So again, this connection between value propositions and customer segments, we call that product market fit. Right? And when you have that, then you have a good story. And when you have a good story, you have a potential for a great pitch and a great launch. So, the question was asking, well, would you start with the business plan? And what we're going to adopt are the tools from Lean Startup. And in that case, you start with something that looks like this, what we would call a canvas. And that would replace the business plan. And for the canvas, what you're trying to do is bring out what are the big questions that you have and try to answer them. So when we look at the customer segments, who are your most important customers, right? How would you describe them? What problems are they trying to solve, right? What needs of theirs could you satisfy, right? So again, big questions as you try to understand, well, who is this person and what are they really struggling to deal with that I can help them with? And on the other side, kind of when we think about the value propositions, that's on the left side, what job do they want you to get done for them, right? And you can begin to articulate, well, here are the things that they find that are of value. And when you understand that value, then you map them to features that you go through and you design. And again, going back to the message triangle, that's what we're trying to make sure that you talk about. Who are the people, right? What benefits are they looking for? And how does your invention provide those benefits, right? So all of this is the same content as you would find on the message triangle. The key is that it's not just a new document. We're not just saying, hey, take the business plan away, use this canvas. What we're asking you to do is invest in a new process. And that process is easier, probably, than developing the business plan. Because all we're asking you to do is guess. Tell us all of your initial guesses, and let's acknowledge that you don't know the answer, I don't know the answer, but the answer is discoverable. And it's discoverable by you searching for those answers outside of the building. All right, so it's not a question of you brainstorming with your teammates to come up with something that's really witty, and that provides the answers to the campus. No, it's brainstorming with your team to come up with all the right questions that you're then going to go out and ask people. So you can validate that, yes, I understand this problem. And that's a core part of what the process looks like. Right? We go out, we make some guesses, we go out and we find some answers, we reflect on those answers, And where they're right, we validate. Where they're wrong, we iterate, right? And sometimes it's called a pivot, but we continue that process until we understand, kind of all of these things very well. And that process is evidence-based entrepreneurship. Right, that whole discovery process we call evidence-based entrepreneurship. And again, it's not just, hey, we're going to replace the business plan with this thing, with this new canvas. We're coming up with a whole new process. Who's the person? What benefits are they looking for? How do I supply those benefits? Can I get that validated that it makes sense from the customer? If not, then I'll make some changes. If so, yes, I'm ready to talk about this with confidence. And that's all incorporating the scientific method that all of you have been exposed to. So it's not all that radical, but it is a different way of looking at business. It's even a different way of looking at invention, right? So how do I begin to fine-tune these things to an actual person? How do I acknowledge the things that I know and the things that I don't know? And for the things that I don't know, I need to now prescribe a plan that gets me to understanding what the answers are. And for that process of, kind of discovery, we want to start here, right? With this idea of a canvas. Our guesses on who the customer is. Our guesses on why this matters to them and what value I can provide. And again, following the scientific method, we start with observation. And so each of you, in proposing your innovation, must have observed something already, right? And that's the beginning and the foundation of your guess. If not, you can still go out and observe and make some alterations to what you think is important. But it starts with some observation, something that you've seen that touches you. All right? So from that observation, can you describe, well, what's the job that the people are trying to accomplish? Some of it is functional, right? Some of it might be emotional. But what job is it that they're trying to achieve, right? It's not just a description of their job title, but what is it they're literally trying to achieve? And that might be the initial part, initial part of your observation. Then what we're asking you to do is to formulate your hypothesis, right, or your guess around what matters to them based on your observation. And you would put those guesses on your canvas, right? And so, again, oftentimes we think about the problems that people confront trying to accomplish a particular job or task. We think about that in terms of pains and gains, right? So if it's a gain, what is your customer desperate to improve? And you might kind of list out a few things. If it's a pain, what are the biggest problems that they're dealing with? And again, you might list a few things. And then the charge is to, okay, now I need to go out and test it. And I'm going to test it by talking to the people I think have these problems. And to do that, again, you have to get out the building, can't just talk to one another, have to talk to actual people who are your customers. And you might go on and ask them, well, what's your biggest problem? So again, you have some sense of what you think the biggest problems are, and to the extent that they repeat those to you, great, you're beginning to get validation. But when they tell you things that you don't have, you have to capture those also. Think about where they fit relative to the ones you thought were important, etc. Right? That helps you to identify their actual problems and needs, not just the ones you think are important. And when you're talking to them, we're asking you to begin to focus on their pains and gains and the jobs they'd like to be done, because then you'll be able to articulate that back to us with confidence. And again, you'll take those things and you'll evaluate them against what you thought was important. To the extent that you got things right, you'll validate them. To the extent you got them wrong, you'll change them, and you'll go through the process again, right? This whole iteration process. And so literally the things that you got wrong, you might take off your canvas and you'll replace them with these new guesses. And that's normal. So we expect that some of the things that you think to be true will not be true. when you go out and speak to people, and they might provide you with new information. That's perfect. That's perfect. That's what we like. That's what we like to see. But in any case, what we like you to do is just kind of go out.
Grant, I think we've lost you. Can you check your connection? Sorry, all, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty. We'll see what's happening with Grant here. Okay, we seem to have lost our connection to our presenter. Hopefully he is logging back in. I do want to reiterate that a lot of the concepts that we're covering today we will also discuss at the boot camp. But we do feel it's important to give you a little bit of the lay of the land about customer discovery and value proposition and a lot of these concepts prior to attending, because we will be asking you to reach out and conduct some initial interviews and talk with some customers prior to attending, as that will help to bolster and further your efforts while you're at the boot camp.
All right, sorry about that.
All right.
If everything works, then no technology is involved. So you have to have a little hiccup to know that there was technology. All right. So hopefully everyone can hear me again. All right, good. All right. So, again, so you go through this iteration process. You restate your new guesses, and you go out and you repeat as needed, right? So you're in the cycle, and we're going to ask you, as Ellen said, to do a small portion of this, right? Not that you'll go out and do 100 interviews, but that's what we do ask people to do who are involved in the National NSF I-Corps program. But we want you to get some exposure to this, so again, so you can ground your invention in actual people, and then begin to talk to us about it. So we go through this iteration process, and eventually, ideally, you come out with that product market fit, problem solution fit thing that I talked about earlier, right? That says, hey, you know what? I made some guesses. I talked to people. I refined those guesses. I went back out and I got some validation that these are real problems. I think I kind of understand now what's going on and how I can help people. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So again, kind of at the 30,000 foot level, right, the process looks like this, right? I hypothesize, right? That just means I make a guess, right? I go out and I test people. I go out and test my ideas, right? I ask people to provide feedback. Please tell me about your day. Tell me about the big problems that you're having, and allow them to talk. I record what it is they say and compare it to what I have, right? So the key aspect is listening, right? Not selling, but listening. And once I make that evaluation, I either say, well, yeah, I validated some things, or I need to go through the process of guessing again, right? And that's what we're asking you to step through. All right. So any questions about that? So again, that's kind of the big overview of the process.
I think we have a question coming in, and as that's being typed, Grant, you mentioned NSF I-Corps. Can you just say a few words about what that program is and why it's this model that we've adapted for the Innovation Challenge Bootcamp?
Sure. So the National Science Program runs the Innovation Corps, right? So we call it I-Corps for short. And what NSF noticed is, well, they were investing, in a bunch of invention. So they put research money behind faculty. They go into the labs and they come up with all of these neat things. But those neat things did not always make it out to the market where it could help society. And one of the biggest gaps was this gap between, well, understanding the science and understanding the people. So what the I-Corps program tries to do is do a 7-week intensive boot camp around customer discovery, where you force people to get out of the building, just like we're talking about, and expose their initial guesses about who the customer is to reality. And, try to understand, well, what did you get right? What did you get wrong? What's important to people? What's not important to people? And can we then use that to help, kind of get these fundamental research investigations into real product that help people?
Great, thank you. And we have a couple of questions, and I think you'll be covering some of this later on in the webinar. But will the teams need to survey customers before the boot camp?
Yes. So
and are they going to be?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, and then I think related to that is it going to be a formal survey, and is there formal documentation? I may be misunderstanding that.
Okay.
But I think that's what has been.
Sure. So yes, we are going to ask you to interview customers before the innovation camp, and I'm going to make a differentiation between survey and interview. So oftentimes people use survey to say, well, I'm pushing out a multiple choice poll to customers where I'm going to aggregate their feedback. What we'd like you to do is engage them personally. So if you could get in front of them for a face-to-face discussion, that would be ideal. If you can't do that and you could do a Skype interview, that would be great. If you can't do that and you can only do a phone interview, that would be fantastic. Because what we would like you to do is to ask open-ended questions that allow them then to guide you to what is important to them, right? When you do a survey, you're prescribing not only the question, but the responses, right? So out of these things, which are more important? Well, what if something totally different was important to me? What if the thing you're asking me is not even important? So we'd like you to do an interview so that you can track those things, okay? So we're going to ask you to do that before the innovation camp.
Thank you. And we do have one more question on this break. So do you end this process when your hypothesis is supported by customer response?
That's a fantastic question. So, the interesting thing is for the Innovation Core program that I was talking about, or I-Corps, we asked teams to go through this 7-week process, do 100 interviews with the hope of getting this product market fit, as we call it, right? Move through problem solution to product market fit. Oftentimes at the end of the program, after 100 interviews, they still haven't found that. And we've had teams that have gone through the process, successfully launched their companies, and still continue doing customer discovery because understanding their customers' needs is important to continuously innovating and keeping revenue coming. So, so ideally, you arrive to a decision point when you get data that supports your decision. And that decision could be, hey, we have a great understanding of the customer and the customer need. That decision could be, well, we have a great understanding of the customer, but there's nothing that we can do for them. And that happens sometimes. But in either case, you probably don't end this process. You probably still continue to go out and talk to people. But we're asking you to go and do a handful of interviews just so you have some data that you can present to us and kind of work through the process of figuring out what's significant in that data, what might not be significant, what does that mean relative to your initial guesses, etc. So we don't expect that you'll do enough to formally end the process. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, thank you, Grant. I think we can continue forward, and we will have another opportunity to ask questions. So please continue to put those into chat as they come to you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And as I was saying, that the goal of this is trying to turn your guesses into facts, right? So that's part of what this discovery process is all about. And those facts could be that you have something that's is capable of transforming the world, or it could be that, well, the problem I thought existed doesn't actually exist. Either are good outcomes. And even from the NSF's perspective, when we do I-Corps, if a team says, hey, I'm a go, I found this really strong product market fit, I understand the customer, I understand their problem, and I can solve their problem, NSF gets really excited about that. If we have a team that goes through and they say, well, you know what, I've done 100 interviews and I found out that I really understand my customer, I understand their problem, but they don't have a problem that I can solve, they're also happy about that also, because that opens up new avenues for you as a researcher to go spend time on. If this is not a significant problem in the way that you thought it was, there are other significant problems that you can tackle, and they'll be happy to fund you tackling those problems. The researchers are happy because they can go and then focus on, kind of important problems that will make a difference. And we often hear from people that they emerge from this program with a different understanding and approach to their own research. So turning those guesses into facts, again, doesn't mean that, yes, I found that I have a great business. It just means I have a better understanding of the customer and what problems they have. So again, I want to bring it back kind of to this message triangle. And again, we'll do sessions specifically on kind of filling out your message triangle. But it gets back to what makes for a great presentation, right? Deep understanding of who the target is, right? So the message triangle asks you first, who's the target? Identify the target to us, right? At the top of the vertex, please help us understand the problems that they're having. And again, we think about the problems and needs in terms of pains and gains, that's fine, but help us understand the problem. What benefits are they looking for? Right? And ideally you'll have gone, heard from people, and have anecdotes, etc., that you could provide that would tell us, yes, here's an example of something that tells me the benefit that they're looking for. Out of the 5 people I spoke to, 4 people thought that this was important. Oh man, that's fantastic. That's the kind of language we want to hear. And there, we're asking you, right, as the innovator, as the inventor, to then map those problems and the needs they have to a solution, right? And that's your opportunity to talk about, well, what's the thing, what's so important about what you're doing, and kind of how is your approach different and better, etc. Fantastic, right? So all of those make for a fantastic pitch, but you can't have a fantastic pitch if you really don't understand the customer. So you have to go out and talk to people. And in order to go out and talk to people, we'd like to provide you with some best practices. And again, this is culled from the couple hundred teams that I've done in NSF's I-Corps program over these long extended 7-week boot camps. All right, so I want to start with a question. So if I'm a great salesperson, do you think that I can sell someone who has a horse farm this stuff? No, just think about it, like internally. Do you think I could sell somebody this stuff as a great salesperson? Right, so I guess your answer would be no, right? And in fact, when you look at horse farms, you can pass by and they're trying to give the stuff away, right? They have so much of it, it's a nuisance. They're trying to give the stuff away. So you might see free horse manure signs. In fact, I was kind of Googling this, and I came across an article where it says, well, this person is the manager of this riding center, and not only could you not sell it to them, they're willing to pay you in order to remove it. So they were paying $450 a month, right, over $5,000 a year, just to remove all of the horse manure from their center. So let's imagine the same product, right? So still horse manure. Now it's wrapped up in a tea bag, and it's called manure tea. Do you think that you could sell that to an organic farm that's looking for fertilization solutions? Right. In all likelihood, in your head, saying, "Yeah, of course I can. I could do that." And in fact, this is that same article. It's not that long ago, so this is 2011, so not like it's kind of 1850. This same person, all right, so the same manager who was paying $5,000 a year plus to have the manure carted away, realized that manure has value to someone. And now she gets paid for people to come and pick up the manure, right? So she thought it was stuff that nobody wanted, right? People giving it away for free, but you can actually earn money from it. All right, so what is the big takeaway, right, from that example, right? So same stuff, right? Horse manure is at the center of both of these, right? So the thing that she was paying to get carted away, and the thing that she's getting paid for people to cart away, is the same stuff, right? So what's the big takeaway? So this unfortunately is not a poll, so I'm just asking you guys to take some time and think about it. So part of the part of what I've heard before. Okay, I see. Great. I love people are putting some stuff in the chat. But part of what I've heard before as I deliver this in I-Corps is that, well, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Kind of that's the big idea around it. I have a slightly different take on it. And the big takeaway for me is that it's not about your manure. Right? Let that sink in for a little while, right? It's not about your manure. So again, I'm a one-trick pony when it comes to this message. We've talked about, well, it's not about invention, it's about innovation. This is the same thing, right? The customer context is really what matters. It's not about your invention. So all of you have, fantastic inventions, I'm sure. What we're trying to make sure is that you can talk about them in the context of fantastic innovations, right? By attaching them to people. Because you can literally take manure and make it into a game-changing product if you understand the customer context, all right? Not about your manure. And, I'm saying this as someone, even before I got involved with lean startup and customer discovery, understood that as part of the fundamental sales process, really understanding customer context, being the key. So this is a sales sheet from a company that I own going back 2012, actual sales sheet that we've shared internally in the company. And there's just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. Again, we're not asking you just to walk through an academic exercise. We think that these are skills that translate, right, even beyond, beyond and you'll take into your career. So, one piece I'd like to highlight is that on the actual sales sheet, so after one of our salespeople went out and they said, hey, I think I have a fantastic opportunity, somebody's ready to buy, we'd say, okay, well, tell us the pain point. So what exactly is happening, in the jobs they think are important that would motivate them to purchase this? So please articulate that, all right? So the salesperson has to articulate that. The other piece that's important in terms of the context is the customer ecosystem. So if they're going to make a decision, who else is involved, right? Is it a one-person operation where the person who uses it is the person who buys it and they influence themselves, or are there other people involved, right? Tell us the absolute context, because the context matters more than what we're even selling, all right? So you have to make sure that you understand the lay of the land and the opportunity before you go into a sale. And I think, it's also important on the engineering side, right? Before you go into a development, you better make sure you understand, kind of what the actual need is, who's involved with that, and what do you need to provide to each of those people, right? So not just academic. And again, I said I'm a one-trick pony, a broken record. Investors understand technology. You're all innovators, self-identified, right, per our poll. You have to understand the people, and we want to make sure you articulate that back to us during the presentation. And to do that, you have to get out of the building. So I want to give some tips about when you get out of the building, how do you learn the key context for the people that are important? What's the ecosystem look like? Who is part of the decision-making process? What are the jobs they're trying to do? what problems do they have trying to do those jobs, and ultimately, if you could find out how they measure success today, that will help you craft a better solution. Doing it in the way we prescribe is what is called lean innovation, right? Wrapping it in this scientific method, etc. That's what we call lean innovation, right? We're marrying this customer discovery to the scientific method. So we had a question. So literally, this is your homework. So we want you to go out and complete at least 5 interviews prior to the boot camp. We want you to log some interviews, and I'll give a little more direction on that as we continue through the webinar. But this is the context, of your assignment. Go out and talk to people about things that you think are important. Who is your customer right now? What problems do you think that they're having? Can you identify what benefits that they are looking for in order to resolve their problems? And can you map those benefits back to your invention? Ultimately, that's what we want you to do. So have at least 5 of them. So I want to just walk through some of the best practices that we recommend to people, and it's around pre-planning the interview, conducting the interview, and also closing the interview. All right, so I'm going to walk through each of those things quickly, and then maybe we'll do a little deeper dive on each one of those. Right, so on the pre-planning side, you're only asked to do 5 interviews. Use your network for warm introductions. If you're doing something that involves, kind of you selling to a business, oftentimes we see people want to go talk to the CEO. That might not be the best person to talk to first, because oftentimes they're removed from the day-to-day problems that people have. So you might want to start at a lower level and get meaningful information from people who would firsthand use what it is that you offer. I mean, I know it's rather obvious, but you should research your target. So oftentimes, even the last few years we've done it in the innovation, the Community College Innovation Challenge, people have to go outside of their networks in order to secure interviews. So that involves cold calling. Right? You have to reach out to someone that you don't know. In that case, it's very important that you research the target to understand what matters to them. You want to disarm them so they don't think that you're trying to sell them something. That's why we say, okay, play the student card so they understand, well, yeah, this is not a sales call. This is me trying to gain understanding. And that is what you're trying to do. We don't want you selling. What we want you doing is asking them for insights and expertise, talking to them about their problems and understanding the context that they operate in. That's fantastic. You've done your job if you've done that. And I would recommend you prepare a script, but you don't walk in with a script. But it helps level set kind of what is it that I'm trying to do. Right? So I can move on reflex action. And then once I've done that part and I'm able to secure an interview, right? When I conduct the interview, we have some guidelines. Right? Remind them that you're here seeking insight and help. That's a reminder for you and for them. Right? So don't pull out the drawings of your invention. Don't show them your prototype and say, hey, how would you use this? You want to talk to them to get their insight and their help. And you want to start wide. Right? So what are the big problems? What are the big problems for that they have to deal with today? And as they begin to talk about their problems, you try to place it in the context of your innovation. Right? That's when you begin to narrow in. But you want to, and again, this gets back to this survey versus interview, what you want them to do is tell you a story about the pain point. It'll help you understand how important it is to them. It'll bring in perhaps other issues that you have not thought about and other opportunities that you might have to innovate, and it'll provide the platform for you to begin to ask deeper questions, the why questions, like why is that actually important to you? And we suggest that you ask why repeatedly until you think you've gotten to the bottom of the issue. Once you've done the interview and you feel like, well, I've gotten some great data, then you want to close the interview. And there are some things that we suggest that might help you secure other interviews. So one is, what else should I ask? That will help you in your interviews moving forward, but it also helps with this interviewee. So you've reached out to them ideally in advance, advised them that you wanted to talk about a particular subject, when the conversation got going, perhaps it just went in one direction. So as they thought about the conversation in advance of you coming, they had planned out some things to say that they never got to talk about. This is the opportunity for them to talk about it. And again, it helps you understand how do they prioritize the problems in their own world. Who else should I talk to? So after my first interview, maybe I can get recommendations of the 4 other people I should talk to, and my 5 interviews for the Community College Innovation Challenge are done. Can I follow up with you later? So I get through the interview, I begin to log my notes, I compare it to the things I guessed, maybe I compare it against other things I've heard from other interviewees. Now I realize, well, there's something I didn't ask them, or there's something I need some more clarity on. It'd be great to get that approval in advance that I can follow up so it's not awkward to call back. And then thank them again. The most important thing we're asking you to do is record your interviews. So again, we want you to go out and do interviews, and we want you to come back and provide us with some evidence of those interviews, because we're going to ask you to cull them as part of the process of creating your presentation for the challenge. So those things are relatively simple steps, right? Not really complicated. But I just want to talk through some of these just with a little more depth. But I think that those 3 slides captured at a high level what we're asking you to do. And anything I say now is just elaborating on those points. So quick poll, how many people have a LinkedIn account here? No. Not that one. Okay, that's fine. If we don't have it quite right, that's fine. We will, we can skip it. Don't worry about it. So, all right. So ideally, most of you have a LinkedIn account. And if not most of you, at least in every group, someone has a LinkedIn account. Hopefully that's true. If it's not true, we can put some objections in the chat and we can get to it on the question part. Because what we're asking you to do on the pre-planning part is to really think about, well, who is your customer? Can you begin to articulate to us who is your customer? And when you think about that, what characteristics do they have? Is it a job title? Is it a particular role in an organization? Do they work in a particular sector? Can you begin to articulate characteristics? And if you can, then you can use LinkedIn or some other social media tool to begin to identify those people. So LinkedIn has a great search feature. You can put in, kind of titles of people. You can try to marry it to your particular institutions to see if you have alumni who are in those roles. And you can begin to develop lists of people that you can reach out to. And again, you can send them a cold message, cold email. If you can identify kind of where they work in a company directory, give them a cold call. Another thing, if you happen to be extremely fortunate, you can look at trade shows that this type of customer might attend. And if it's happening near you in the timeline of the Community College Innovation Challenge, show up to it. We've had a number of teams at I-Corps utilize that strategy successfully. So identify a trade show, have the serendipity that it overlaps the I-Corps bootcamp, and then they go to the trade show and they're able to collect many interviews. But this is the process that you need to walk through in order to get to the 5 interviews, right? Really think about who your target is and how you might find it. And again, if you're using something like LinkedIn or kind of the extended network, so you're getting a warm introduction, but somebody you don't really know, we suggest that you develop a cold call script. And the cold call script really just begins to capture kind of who are you? Right? What are you looking for? Why are you contacting me? How much time do you need? Like fundamental things that can get people from being averse to speaking with you to allowing them to speak with you. And so as we walk through that, I put together a sample cold call script, and I just want to highlight some strategies that you might use to describe who you are. So, a good script, you'll start off, hello, and you'll introduce yourself. Well, I'll say, my name is Grant Warner. I'm working for the National Science Foundation project exploring product shipment, right? Just making something up. So why is an introduction like that important? So one, you want to disarm them. right? It's important for them to understand that you're not a salesperson. So when I get a cold call, the first thing I do is I say, okay, well, this seems like maybe it's a sales call. Nope, not answering. Click, bye. So we want to disarm that immediately, right? So I said, well, I work for the National Science Foundation, or I'm a student at, kind of whatever your school is, and I'm exploring this. So I'm not selling. I'm someone who's trying to understand. And the subtle message is saying what? It's not about my manure, right? So it's not going to be about me. It's going to be about you. That's important. All right, I'm reaching out to experts in this area to gain their insight into factors that drive product shipment decisions. All right, so again, we want to emphasize that this is not a sales call. You want to disarm people so that they're not on the defensive. We've complimented them by saying, hey, you're an expert. And it also reminds you that we're trying to gain insights, not to sell your invention. So you shouldn't be showing them your thing right out the gate. You're trying to explore important things related to their jobs to do. Again, it's not about your manure. This thing is phrased in such a way to communicate that, right? I'm interested in your insights. Okay, why did I contact you? I've been advised that you have deep expertise in this topic. So you're trying to stroke their ego in a way, right? Differentiate them from the crowd, right? I've done some research. I've targeted you for a particular reason. I'm not trying to sell. I'm really trying to understand, and you're someone that I can learn from. Again, it's not about your manure, right? And in the end, I hope that I can speak to you for 5 to 10 minutes. We scope it so that it's easy to say yes. If I tell somebody half hour, maybe I don't have half an hour in my day, but I probably have 5 or 10 minutes that I can carve out for a college student or a researcher on a topic that's interesting to me, where I've been recognized as an industry leader and my feedback matters. So that's an example of a cold call script. And, so we're going to ask you to do that as part of the homework, right? So the big part of the homework is, hey, you got to go out and get these 5 interviews. But what we'd like you to do is think through how you get those 5, right? So can you give us your cold call script, right? Who are you? Kind of how would you introduce yourself to people and to this project in such a way that you can get them talking open-endedly about the problems they have and not about your invention? All right? So that's the pre-planning portion, right? And then we talk about conducting the interview. So ideally, what you would have done is kind of gone through this process where, hey, I'm beginning to map out what my guesses are beforehand, right? That's what we want you to do beforehand. So we'll send you an addendum that will have the Canvas piece on there, with some prompts that you say, okay, well, who do you think your customer is? What problems do you think they're having? And let's make that plain before you go out and conduct the interview. Think about what it is you're trying to test. What guess is it you are trying to refine before the interview? Then when you get to the interview, you want to ask questions around that, but you want to start wide. Again, ask them to tell a story about the pain point and begin to see if it begins to overlap with what your guesses are. Where they say things are bothering them, make sure you get a deep understanding of why that's important. That helps you capture the value, right? Is it because they lose money? Is it because they lose time? Is it because they lose prestige, right? So it's not actually a functional issue. It might be an emotional issue. Really try to understand why that thing is important to them. And at this stage, don't talk about your products, not about your manure, right? So talk about their problem. If you complete the interview, right, where you fully expose their problem and they ask you, hey, kind of what are you working on? Fine. Then you show it to them. But if you show it to them too early, you'll bias the whole interview. Of course, when you show it to them, they'll love it, right? It's like showing someone your baby. You don't show someone your baby and they go, oh, wow, that baby's horribly ugly. Nobody does that, right? They say, oh, how cute. That's just what happens, regardless of what they may think. Oh, baby's so beautiful. So you don't want to start with your thing. You really want to understand what their problems are. All right. So you're looking for their insights. Right. That's something you communicate to them, but you also communicate for you. And so I just grabbed an example from a couple of I-Core teams that, again, begins to speak at this hypothesis thing, right? So they went out, so these are two separate teams. They went out with a number of hypotheses they were trying to test. So one was looking at a solution for indoor farming, and they thought that, farmers might be interested in what they were doing because humidity is hard to control, that they currently recognize that humidity is a critical factor in plant disease, and that their current mechanism for lighting their grow house generates heat. Right. So again, the reason I show this is because each of those hypotheses are testable. Right. So someone can say yes or no to them. Well, I perceive it in that way, or I don't perceive it in that way. Right. So that's kind of a mechanism that you want to use to evaluate, are my hypotheses any good? So the sniff test is, can someone say no to this? Right. So kind of, if your hypothesis is, well, people would like things to be cheaper, that's probably no one's going to say no to that. Everybody likes cheap. In fact, I like free. Everything, if I could get free, I would say yes to. So again, you want to make sure that you can test those hypotheses. Team B, I kind of showed this particular team because they went through and they mapped their hypotheses to things that they could do. Right? And those are also a great way to think about your hypotheses. So it's not helpful to validate things that you can't solve. Right? So make sure that you're thinking about things in the context of things that you might solve. And again, the primary objective when you go out is to try to understand the pain and gain for the customer and really understand the context. So is this person the only person involved in the decision? Are there other people involved in the decision? If so, who? And if you could come out with those things, you've had a very successful interview. So again, as we conduct the interview, you want to start with the hypotheses. Your questions will come out of those hypotheses, all of those things you have before the meeting. Then you want to make sure you ask open-ended questions in the meeting. And ideally, you're not asking them about future behavior. You're asking them about past behavior. Right? So when you have done this in the past, what has been the, can you walk me through the decision-making process? Can you show me how you solve XYZ problem? Because when you focus on their behavior, things that they've actually done, you'll collect evidence. When you ask them to speculate, you actually don't know what's true and what's false, right? They might just be saying things to make you happy. So you really want to focus on the behavior to capture the evidence. You want to make sure that you're listening more and talking less. And, when you think you've heard something important, just parrot it back to see if you understood it in the way that they meant it. I think that's really critical to getting confirmation here. So I have some other suggestions. Well, we don't like you to do, focus groups where it's 10 people in the room and that counts for 10 people. We want you to have one person at a time to avoid groupthink. If you could have multiple team members available for the interview, that's even better, right? Some person can talk and you can have a real casual conversation. Someone else can just scribe and take down the notes. Again, best practices. And just to touch back on this open-ended question piece, kind of the open-ended questions are the best, right? Can you explain? How does? What do you mean by? When would? Why? Again, these things prompt people to talk, and the more they talk, the more insight you can gather. Again, just pushing back on this poll versus interview piece, right? So we prefer you to have an interview, a conversation with the customer, and then use that as an opportunity to go back and derive insights, from what you've been able to log from that interview. All right, so to look at this example of the, kind of open-ended questions, I'm going to play a little game here. So we're going to call this good question, bad question. So I'm going to run through a couple of them to see, kind of just to make sure we're all on the same page with respect to good question, bad question. Then we're going to open it up to a poll to make sure that you've all got the hang of it before we kind of set you loose to begin interviews on your own. All right. So when we look at the question that we have here, what is the biggest issue you face in when dealing with process or activity Y. All right, we're playing good question, bad question. Do we think this is a good question or a bad question? So think to yourself, good question, bad question, and I will reveal it. All right, so that's a good question, right? So one, it's open-ended, which is what we want. It's going to prompt someone to talk. We're asking them to think about big issues. It provides an opportunity for them to either confirm what you think is important as a pain, or kind of to not confirm it, to say like, hey, well, these are the big issues, and if those issues don't overlap with what you think is important, here's your opportunity to begin to explore why that is, or why that is. So I think that's a great question. All right, would you buy a product which did X? All right, so good question or bad question? Well, what do you think? You think that's a good question or a bad question? Would you buy a product which did X? All right, so that's an example of a bad question. All right, so this is a bad question because, one, it's a yes/no question. We don't want that. We want questions that prompt discussion, right? Extended conversation from your customer. We're also asking them to project into the future, right? We're not collecting really strong evidence there. We're at the stage where we need to collect evidence not about the price, but whether or not there's a problem, right? So at this stage, really, really bad question. All right, so I'm going to do this last one, and we're going to open up to some of the polling. All right, what are the implications of not solving the problem? All right, good question or bad question? So we've seen an example of a good question, seen an example of a bad question. All right, so this is a good question. Again, open-ended, begins to get at the why something might be important, and you're trying to capture a value. So that's a good question. All right, so now we're going to go into the game a little bit more. How are you dealing with this today? So hopefully, we pull up the poll. All right, let's see. Good question, bad question. All right. All right, we got really strong responses around the good question piece. All right, so let's see where this lands now. All right, so good question. So when we think about it, it's open-ended. It allows them to talk about something real. What are they doing today? Right, that's evidence that you can capture. You can also begin to deep dive around that. When they begin to tell you what their solutions look like, you can understand, well, why'd you make that choice? What's important about the solution? So a really rich question. What solutions have you tried? Good question or bad question? What do we think? All right. So again, getting some strong responses around the good question. All right, let's see what we find here. All right, good question. So again, asking people about their behavior, right? That's evidence that you can collect. Gives you an understanding of how people view the problem. So are they spending money currently to try to solve this problem? That'd be great to know. That tells you something about how important it is. Fantastic. What would your dream product do? All right, good question or bad question? All right, so we got a little bit more of a split here in terms of good question, bad question. So majority thinks that it's a good question, but a significant number think it's a bad question. All right, let's see what the videotape says. All right, videotape says it's a good question. but it's also a bad question. Okay, so, again, I have two minds of this thing. So there are some instructors that I work with who say this is kind of this is the magic wand question. I can get a lot of deep insight. I don't really like it early on because you're asking the customer to do kind of what your job is, right, which is to innovate, right? So what you're looking for is to confirm the problems, what they've tried, and then you come up with what the solutions are. But I can understand the good part of it, which says, hey, it's open-ended. All right, so would you pay X for a solution that did Y? Any thoughts around that? Good question, bad question? Okay, really strong responses around that. So we got a bunch of bad questions immediately. All right, let's take a look. All right, good. Right, bad question. Right, where does the money come from to deal with this issue? Good question, bad question. Okay, getting some strong responses around that. So again, I can understand why people feel that way, but I would say that's a good question. So again, this is slightly different than asking people would they pay X to do for something that does Y. Here you're asking who else is kind of involved in the decision making, which is what you're trying to get at. So there might be different ways to phrase it, but it does help to open up what does the ecosystem look like, which is part of your goal. What do you think about this solution? Good question, bad question. All right. So again, we're getting a split here. It's not so clear cut. All right. So we got a narrow lead for a good question. All right. Let's see kind of what we get here. So I don't think I'm split about this, right? So no, bad question, right? Bad question, bad question. We don't want you talking about your thing, all right? So if there's one takeaway, right? It's not about your manure. What we want to do is make sure that we get to the point where we understand the problem. So there is some opportunity, again, to talk about your thing, but we don't want to do it early, right? We want to make sure that we're focused on developing the problems. So what I would suggest is that you go through the process, right, of developing, again, this is attached to your homework, of developing hypotheses to test, writing out an interview script with questions, and then giving them to one another, right? Play good question, bad question amongst yourselves so you can get a sense of whether or not you are on the right track. All right, so just a couple minutes for questions, and then we'll wrap up here. So any questions about what we've presented so far?
Grant, we had a couple of questions that were from I think the last question break. There was one asking if there's going to be a focus on quantitative or qualitative data analysis in relation to customer.
So we're going to ask you to do a little bit of both. So you're going to have to take kind of people's open-ended responses and give us a qualitative sense of kind of what you think that means. But then we're also going to ask you, well, as you've done that across all of your interviews, what is the pattern that emerged, right? So if you think that this response indicates that this, kind of this is a priority to them, how many other people felt that way? Was it 3 out of the 5 you interviewed, 5 out of the 5, 1 out of the 5? Help us understand how important it was to, kind of the multiple people that you've interviewed. So it'll have to be a little bit of both.
And one more question before we move forward. What is the deadline to present?
So you're going to present your interview findings when we arrive at the boot camp. So one of the sessions we're going to ask you to kind of talk about what you found out during the interviews. But obviously you're going to have to, in order to do that, you have to complete all your interviews before arriving in DC.
Great, thank you. I think we can move forward. I think we'll have one final break for
All right.
questions.
So again, we talked about, kind of making sure you close by asking people a few fundamental questions. What else should I ask? Who should I talk to? Can I follow up with you? Thank them. The most important piece, though, is to make sure you log your interviews. And there are a couple of things that I want to highlight. So again, going into the interview, it would be great if you make sure that you've identified the hypotheses, right? So that's at the bottom, what we hope to learn. We also ask that you identify who it is you're talking to. So tell us who was the customer that you were talking to, right? Don't necessarily need their name, but if we had their role, it allows us to evaluate who you spoke to in the context of the 5 people, how important you think they are in your ecosystem, etc. And we'll talk a little bit more about this so we can kind of suss out what their role is during the boot camp, But at the top level, what we would like you to provide is a summary. All right, so you went through the interview. What was the most important thing that you learned from this interview? And ideally, it's something. So you put together some piece. So here they were actually exploring whether or not someone else, whether there was a need for a new sampler, at some of these pharmaceutical production companies. And here they were very truthful. Say, well, no, I don't think there is any need for one. Right? That was the big insight. So that was fantastic. And then we'd like you to be able to support the things that you tell us are important with interview details. So I don't need kind of the full transcript of the interview, just kind of some highlights that say, well, here are some of the big things that they've said. So I might not have weighted all of these things as importantly, or I may have taken 5 or 6 of these bullets and combined them to give you my big takeaway, but give us a little sense of the details. And if you think that, well, these validated multiple of my guesses around value propositions or customer segments, tell us that too, right? So what are the ones that you think are validated? And that's this must-have, nice-to-have, don't-care thing on the bottom. And again, you can just say validated, invalidated, or neutral, but just tell us what you think you found from that. So again, it's kind of the framework for how you might record your interviews here, right? So give us some clear insight, identify the customer who you talked to, let us know what the hypotheses were you were testing, give us just enough details to support the insight so I can understand why you listed that insight from this interview, and if you could, just kind of weigh the impact that it has on your initial guesses, right? Does it help you to confirm that, yes, you found the right customer? Does it suggest that maybe you need to talk to a different type of person altogether? Just give us some insight into that, all right? All right, so any questions there? And we will be sharing this deck.
No,
Okay. Right,
I think we can move.
So, again, just to kind of wrap this all up in a bow, so at a very high level, right? So for the customer discovery, what I'm trying to reinforce is that what you want to do is know your objective before you go in. Make sure that you've mapped out what your hypotheses are, some of your questions, so that you can go in there, fire off some questions. They're open-ended, and the customer can talk while you listen. Right? So if you're listening more and talking less, you're doing it right. If you're talking more and listening less, something's wrong. We prefer you talk to them face-to-face, but we want it to be a conversation. So at the very least, try to get them on the phone and then record your responses the way kind of we've outlined above. All right, don't sell. It's not about your thing, right? So don't talk about your technology. Don't ask them what they want. Don't take feature requests. Try to understand the problems that they're dealing with, right? Again, it's not about your manure, but it is about trying to understand who is the customer, right? What is it they're actually trying to accomplish, and what is the current problem that they're dealing with that you might be able to solve, right? That's that problem solution fit piece. All right, and with that, we are done. All right, any last questions? And I'll hand it back over to Ellen.
Yeah, so if there are any final questions, if you could enter them into the chat. And just as a reminder, we will be sending out a link to the recording of this webinar as well as to the PowerPoint slides. Friday's webinar recording and slides have already been posted to the CCIC website, and an email will also go out with that information shortly. So just so you're aware that we do share that information with you so you can follow up. I see that there is a question coming in. So while that's coming in, I just wanted to remind you of the contact information and the website. In response to the question about receiving the link, if you signed up or registered for this webinar, you will get an automated email with a link to the recording and the slides. And then once the information from this webinar is posted to the website, which is the AACC /CCIC, the first website on this slide, I'll send an email out to all participants to let them know that all materials, all recordings, and all slides are now up on the website. Are there any, if there are not any further questions, I think there's just a couple of thank yous coming in to our presenters. So I would like to thank Grant for his time and for all this information. And I will say, if you want to stay on for just a moment, we'll be moving into just a short survey that helps us improve these webinars. So if you wouldn't mind answering a few questions on that, we appreciate it. As always, if you've got questions on this process or on logistics for the boot camp, please contact me or my associate Kate Lockhart, and if we can't answer them, we'll route them to the appropriate person. And we look forward to seeing everyone in June. Thank you all.